Okay, we're live now. I think we're going to start with the trailer of the 12th hour. Oh, 9.
We humans, like all other species, are naturally exploitive. Except that now we have the capabilities, the tools, the energy resources to dominate this planet. What is it about the way we have evolved to think and act that is shaping this world that we have so recently created? Mankind faces a challenge unlike any other in its history. And it's a problem that evolution did not equip us to solve. We are living in a momentous time, facing our most important test ever. Is it even reasonable to believe that we who created the problem in the first place might also be able to stop it? And if so, allow future generations to avoid a desperate and deadly world left to them by us?
Okay, welcome everybody. My name is John Zavalny, and I'll be your host today as we talk about an intriguing new climate documentary produced by Jim Swift and directed by Susan Kucera titled The 12th Hour. One of the things that I found really intriguing about this film is the idea that our human evolutionary history may play a major role in how we think about and react to our warming planet. Before I introduce our guests today, I'd like to share a little bit about my background. I'm a retired public school teacher after 30 years in the LA Unified School District, where I taught middle school science, high school biology, and environmental studies at both levels. My real passion is environmental education and getting inner city students to understand and experience the natural world. My wife and I saw former Vice President Al Gore tape his slideshow that became The Inconvenient Truth. Once he announced he was going to train presenters, I applied and was accepted. I was trained in the third group ever trained in January 2007. I made it part of my job as an educator to provide climate education in as many classrooms and to as many students as possible, and quickly became one of the top presenters in the organization, which leads me to how I got here today. I work with Michael Conherd at the Video Project to provide free environmental documentaries to schools. I provide an educational component for the films and classroom facilitation. I've already introduced the 12th hour to several classrooms, and I'd never heard of the evolutionary mismatch theory before I watched the film. The idea that our society and the environment are both changing at such a rapid pace, our brains cannot evolve fast enough to deal with these new changes. This was something I had never considered before. My guests today are two people who may be able to help us understand that better. Bruce Hood is a Canadian-born British experimental psychologist and a philosopher who specializes in developmental cognitive neuroscience. Mark completed undergraduate studies in psychology and received a Master of Arts and Philosophy from the University of Dundee and his PhD from Cambridge. After moving to the US, he took a place as a visiting professor at MIT and a faculty professor at Harvard. He is currently a professor at the University of Bristol, where he conducts research in the School of Psychological Science. And since 2018, Bruce has been delivering the Science of Happiness course at the University of Bristol, which is the basis for the BBC podcast, The Happiness Half Hour, co-presented by Mark. He's appeared in a number of TV science documentaries, and in 2011, he delivered the Royal Institution Christmas Lectures, which were broadcast on the BBC to over 4 million viewers. Susan Kucera is joining us today. She's worked with Bruce on 3 films, and she's an award-winning filmmaker and the director of The 12th Hour, her 6th documentary film. She's the recipient of a gold medal from the UN for her film Living in Futures Past, a collaborative with Academy Award-winning actor Jeff Bridges, as well as Hot Money with Jeff Bridges and General Wesley Clark, films that focus on different facets of climate change. Thanks for being here, Susan. Bruce, first I'd like to thank you for being here today, or is it tonight in England where you are?
It's 10 o'clock in the evening in England, and I know that Susan's visiting us as well, so the two of us are doing the late shift, as it were, so we seem a little sluggish and slow. It's only because the melatonin is kicking in.
Well, I think I'm talking fast enough for all of us, but I can slow that down a little bit too.
No worries.
But thank you for being here at this late hour. It's really appreciated. I'd like to start out with asking you about how you got interested in your careers. One of the things that they teach us when I got trained at Climate Reality is to tell your climate story. So you relate to the audience a little bit. I introduced us, but that's really just our credentials, our working credentials. It doesn't really tell us who we are. So how did you get interested in being a neuroscientist studying human cognitive problems and teaching about happiness? I mean, when I read that, that just puts a smile on my face. I mean, how did that happen?
How long have you got? I mean, this could be a 3-day interview if you really... No, okay, look.
We got 30 minutes, so...
No, I mean, I've always been fascinated by the mind from a very early age. In fact, I was really interested in magical thinking and beliefs, and I actually thought about paranormal stuff and all that. And I went to university and discovered actually there's not much evidence for it. But what was really interesting was this new thing called psychology, because when I went to university, it was considered fringe in Dundee in Scotland. So I took this topic and I got really excited about the mind. And that's really been, you know, my passion for many decades now. But this answer, how did I get into climate change? Well, that was really down to Susan. About, I think it must have been, what, Susan, 8 years ago?
Yeah, quite a while. It's been a long time.
It was about that. I'd just written this book about the illusion of self. And that's the philosophical bent that you were referring to. I'm very fascinated by the way we can conceive of our minds and think of who we are. And in that book, I pointed out that we have a distorted notion of identity, and this has implications. And then Susan contacted me out of the blue and said she'd, actually, I think it was your daughter had read the book, maybe, or one of you read it.
Yeah, she gave me the self-illusion, and I read it, and I was fascinated.
And so it really was Susan who got me, and I hadn't really thought about the relationship with the ideas I was making, and this real conundrum about why do we seem to be relentlessly over-consuming and oblivious to the climate crisis. Now, 8 years ago, that was much the case. Of course, a lot has happened since then. So I think Susan has been riding this crest of the wave and leading it in many ways, drawing attention to it, so that so many people now are putting it at the forefront of policy. And this is why, thanks to people like you, John, putting it into the schools. So really for the next generation, trying to make the necessary changes that we have to make. So that's why I got into it.
Okay. Susan, I kind of like to ask you the same question because you're a producer of climate films. And in documentary, it was really storytelling. So how did you get involved?
Actually, yeah, I mean, I love filming. I've done films other than ones about climate change, but I did meet a gentleman on Thin Air, which was about carbon credit trading, and it ended up on Netflix. And I did meet Jim Swift, who I think this is our 6th film together, who has been the executive producer and helping produce these films. It's been his passion to try to figure out why we're not doing what we need to do, because it's so obvious that we need to do something. And so we've been exploring this through different prisms. We looked at the whole money system with Hot Money. We've looked at philosophy, and of course, with Bruce's work with the mind, why is it that we can't seem to be able to knuckle down and actually fix this problem? And so that's kind of how I got into it. And I get to meet such interesting people in my job.
Yeah, we've become good friends. I have to say that, you know, it's not just a professional relationship. I've been out to visit Susan in her home in America and Hawaii, and it's been a long-term relationship. And I just, it's just really a good balance, a good mix between the science and the creative process, because I think, you know, people can be a little bit overwhelmed by the facts and the figures, but if you put it in the right creative forum, then it can actually, the message becomes so much more powerful. And that's why I think this kind of work and this sort of film is so important.
And also, I just want to add, you know, I have a daughter who's 28 and she's going to university. And I think, didn't your happiness, the whole happiness thing start at Bristol because students were struggling. Some were struggling with mental health.
Well, that's right. I mean, my interest in happiness is somewhat tangential to this discussion tonight, but I mean, I have been increasingly concerned about the younger generation. I mean, for me, I've had the best years of my life in higher education. I've really enjoyed it. It's given me so much opportunities. And I feel sorry for the new generation of students who don't seem to be enjoying it as much as I did. And I've realized that actually that's because there's a lot of pressures on them. Now, those pressures are from all sorts of angles, and indeed it includes some concerns about the future and climate change. But a lot of it is actually to do with the whole process of higher education. So I can't take credit for that. That's actually as a problem which has been recognized in many universities. And in fact, the inspiration for this course came from a former student of mine, Laurie Santos, who's at Yale. And it showed me that even if students who get to one of your top Ivy Leagues in America, if they're unhappy, then the rest of us are probably going to be a bit miserable as well. So I think this is speaking to a more general problem of the pressures of education that children face these days. So yeah, I put together a course which brings the neuroscience of motivation, emotional experiences, and actually a lot of evidence-based techniques. And it works. The kids love it. I shouldn't call them kids. The young students love it. And yeah, it makes a difference. It seems to have made a real impact. And I'm now giving it to many other universities as well. But that's somewhat tangential to the 12th hour.
In a way, it's not, though, because I also meet young people. And I'm sure, John, also, you've worked with young people. And I can imagine that, you know, they in the paper every day, there's some other new bad thing that's going to happen, you know, with the climate change and everything. And that has to wear on kids. Yeah. Right? I mean, things are happening in our lifetime now, right? How bad is it going to get in the future? And so I always think, well, things like your course must be able to help people deal with, you know, managing that stress.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things, and this is kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, one of the problems that I think wasn't here 20 years ago is social media. And I'm pretty certain a lot of the people listening in on this were on social media, for heaven's sakes. It didn't exist really 20 years ago. And that in many ways has amplified many of the insecurities and it's created a perspective that there's a lot going wrong in the world. So it's very difficult to be, you know, not inoculated from the concerns of the world, but you do see a lot of issues. And so you hear about this all the time. And this obviously brings concern, but then that's also the solution, because something like climate change requires the concerted efforts of everyone. It can't just be a few people. It has to be literally a world movement in order to make the difference. So whilst social media on one hand is not necessarily good for your mental well-being because it presents this kind of with this distorted view of the world, it is, on the other hand, actually probably the necessary tool to get those movements. So I use, for example, I give a talk. I wrote a book recently called Possessed, and it's the psychology of why we are compelled to overconsume. So this is very relevant to 12th hour, because deep within us is this tendency to think that we need to have more and more things to be successful. And the science of happiness says, well, actually, that's entirely wrong, because once you reached a basic living standard, having more stuff doesn't actually make you any happier. But because marketing taps into our insecurities and the power of media and social media makes us feel inadequate, we tend to overconsume. But in that talk and in that book, I point out that actually we've seen the changes starting to emerge. So about 4 years ago, David Attenborough, who's our kind of national treasure when it comes to the climate movement stuff, he did a documentary for the BBC demonstrating the impact of plastics. And this is something that Susan addressed in her last film. And that single documentary, through the power of social media amplification of it, led to the abolishment of plastic bags. We now see much more activism in kind of ridding the world of plastic. So what I'm saying is that actually the solution is with the new technologies and allowing us to share that message.
Okay. When I was reading about your course of happiness that the science of happiness that you teach, you mentioned something about breaking the cycle of grief or of despair, excuse me. And that getting the kids engaged and in a holistic way of giving back to the community, some altruism is part of that. And that's always been part of the way I teach too. One way I try to help solve the climate crisis is through environmental stewardship projects that I have my students get involved with, and I train teachers to use it in their classroom, getting them involved to make changes in their community, getting the kids involved, and having them become the leaders of those projects, developing leadership skills, and getting them engaged to make a difference in their community. And it makes such a difference. They get so engaged, they get so involved, and kids can do amazing things if you let them.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that word engagement is absolutely critical to learning. And that's the problem, I think. We've sleepwalked into the situation where we are focusing on outcome measures as measures of education. So we're obsessed by performance on exams. We're obsessed by all these markers. And the trouble is that moves us further and further away from the engagement, from the joy of learning, from the thrill of actively doing things. And so in that course, The Science of Happiness, yes, it is a university course, but what makes it different is that students actually have to do something. So, knowledge is not enough. You can watch as many documentaries, you can read as many self-help books, but it won't make any difference unless you actually take part and actively try to make a difference. And that process of engagement, John, as you just pointed out, is so fulfilling. Because when kids actually kind of do things together, first of all, they get the benefits of the social interaction, but they can see the tangible consequences of actively doing things. So whether it's happiness, whether it's trying to reduce climate impact, all of these things through the acts of engagement can really be, very impactful.
Actually, yeah, here in the United States, we have something called service learning, and we have community service, which are really two different things. With community service, you go put in your hours, you do a project, and you're done. But service learning was kind of what you're describing, is connected to what you're learning. Yeah. I mean, that's when the best learning takes place, when you can have a connection to doing something to what you're learning. That's when it really gets embedded in you.
Isn't community service a punishment? I think that's what we give to prisoners. Is that true?
You're right.
Okay. Well, it shouldn't be a punishment. I mean, that's the point. If you're giving back, and I think that we've had many decades. So this goes back to one of the issues that is addressed both in Living the Future's Past and the 12th Hour, is that the dominance of the capitalist system has really emphasized this need to acquire more and more things in order to be successful. And this is, of course, very pronounced in individualistic societies. And that's because, as I said, our psychology is driven by a sense of comparison all the time, competition. And we feel we've got to have more and more things. And that's also the source of our inadequacies. It's the source of our unhappiness, because there's always someone better than you. And so you get into the situation where you just always feel inadequate all the time. But we're also the victims of the power of media and the power of advertising, which taps into these insecurities. But that is now changing. And I think we're moving towards more ethical approaches, more sustainable approaches in business. And I think that's what we're going to see over the next decades as people move away from the disposable income, the disposable capitalist system, the fast fashion, to one which is more sustainable. And that's what the next generation are asking for. So I'm quite optimistic. I know Susan's films can be kind of depressing at times in terms of the implications, but there is a good news message.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask, because when I first started doing climate change presentation, it was based on the inconvenient truth, which were all climate catastrophes and catastrophic predictions. And there's a lot of that in the 12th hour, but there is those moments where you say, well, we have hope. We can do this. We can do that. And so that message is something that I always try to get through to the kids, that, we have to leave them with hope, because if we leave them with despair, they've got nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I think that's true, but I think it's also, we can't have our head in the sand. I think we do have to recognize there is a degree of urgency, and whilst you know, I am encouraged that, you know, for example, the green movement is, if you have to do the relative comparisons to where that was 10 years ago, where it is now, and so it does appear that these changes, you know, are in the wind, that things are happening. But we, as the more elderly generations, we also have a responsibility to make the changes. You know, we need to make changes in our lives, all of us. And typically, people don't feel that they're making any difference, saying, "Well, why should I do something? I can't make any impact." But that's the kind of fallacy of the crowd, that people don't think that they're making any impact, but collectively you can. So I go back to the impact of individual consumers refusing to use plastic bags. And then that changed to it. And we saw that with the fur trade. Again, you know, that was a fashionable thing back in the 1970s. And I don't know, many countries now, you won't see furs at all. So it does happen, and it can happen at a grassroots level. That said, I still think it's incumbent on governments to drive it from a top-down position as well, because there has to be some really systematic approaches to changing the business model. So that can be controlled through taxation, can be controlled through fiscal policies. So it's not simply down to the individual consumer, but yeah, I think we can make a difference. So I am hopeful about that. And everything indicates to me that the next generation is less materialistic than my current generation. And that's a good sign.
No, I agree. It's all about giving them hope and letting them find the solutions, because they're capable of doing it.
Yeah, and there's some there's some fascinating things that are coming along now. If you know, I was traveling down to Cornwall, which is the California of the UK. It's our west coast, and we even have surfing there, believe it or not. But you have to wear wetsuits. It's so blimmin' cold. But if you go down there, you'll see that they've got an extensive program of windmills. In fact, our wind farms, offshore wind farms, are now generating massive amounts, and we just need to move faster towards that direction. So I think the policymakers are listening. I think that people are voting, and this next generation, they've said that climate change is their priority. So it should hopefully get rid of us old fuddies who've been living in the dark ages, trying to kind of create this false economy of living forever, because we ain't.
Those of us who caused the problem will be gone, so it's really up to them to fix the problem that they're going to have to live with.
Well, I think that we shouldn't shift the blame. I think there are things that we could do. We should do. I mean, it's kind of ironic. I mean, most parents would give up their lives for their children. You know, most people, they feel so strongly. It's such an emotional thing that we've evolved. But somehow the notion of doing something now to save your children's children's children, that just seems so remote and distant. And that, by the way, is one of the problems, that it is difficult to change people's attitudes, because they can't project the consequences of their actions that far into the future. And yet they can see it individually with their immediate offspring. So it is kind of, maybe with their grandchildren as well. But beyond that, it is actually quite difficult to get people to recognize the impact that they're having. So that's one of the challenges, but it will happen with time.
It is, and that's what the mismatch theory actually states, that we're so worried about today and taking care of what's in front of us now that we don't even think about what's going to happen in the future.
Exactly. So you see that with people's savings behavior when they're saving for the future, and pensions and stuff. Like people, you can't rely on their individual free will to do that. They need to be told what to do, because they just psychologically can't anticipate and see into the future.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question about technology. You know, I've been working with Jane Goodall now for about 25 years, and we talk about happiness, and she says when she gets out into the forest, into nature, that's it. That just recharges her batteries, and that everybody should do that. Now, you mentioned something in the film, The 12th Hour, about how we're disconnected from the land. We used to use tools, which really made you more connected to the land when you were working it. But now we have machines to do that work. And now our students, young people are so connected to their technology that I think they're really disconnected from nature. And I think maybe that could be part of the problem. And maybe that's part of why they're not happy too.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, actually. And actually, there's very good research showing that, going for a walk in nature or experiencing natural awe generates a very profound experience. I mean, the most profound experience, apparently, and I'm never going to have this opportunity, but hopefully maybe some of the guys tuning in, is when you go into space and you look back on our planet. And I usually, when I give a talk, on a big rotating planet showing the Earth, because that produces something called the overview effect. To paraphrase the astronaut Ed Gibson, when you look back at our planet, you realize how diminutive your life and your concerns are relative to the size of the universe. So it gives you this immediate sense of perspective. Right. And that all, because the trouble is, in our normal days, our attention is focused inwards towards our own problems. We're egocentric. And what we need to do is become more allocentric. We need to step away from our problems and get perspective. And when you can do that, you become more objective exactly about how bad those problems really are. Whereas when you're closely focused in on your problems, they are amplified. Why? Well, because you see your problems in relation to social media where everyone's having a great time. So it just makes you look more and more miserable because you're not measuring up. So I think you're right. I think the technology shifts our attention externally, internally, and then we focus in on our problems. Then we lose objectivity, blow everything out of proportion, and lo and behold, we're miserable.
Right. Susan, did you want to add something to that?
Oh, no, I'm along for the ride. I love listening to Bruce.
Okay.
She just lets me go on and on.
I would just say I do think his work and some of the other, obviously, the folks that I've been interviewing, so important looking at yourself, right? Because there's so many things, obviously, that we, collectively we have to get together to get ourselves, right, to do the top-down thing, but we also have to do the bottom-up thing. And I don't know. I know how Jim feels. He doesn't feel very confident that things will get better. And like Bruce said, we shouldn't stick our head in the sand, obviously. But with young kids, I think I've definitely got jet lag.
but Susan, you're right. I mean, I think going back to this, now that you've got me onto happiness and you've got me onto materialism, which is my I'm really interested in materialism now. And one of the things that I don't know if it's covered adequately I don't know if I've expressed it, is that for a long time, who we are and how we feel about ourselves in terms of identity has been expressed by what we own. What we can claim is our stuff. And indeed, if you think about the history of civilization, it's a continual catalog of conflict and fighting over resources. And notice when I said our planet, well, we say it's our planet as if it's owned by everyone, but actually back down on Earth, nothing could be further from the truth, because every square mile, every square foot has been fought over, contested, controlled by systems which actually exclude people access. It's only the rightful owners. And so this is the problem, that civilization, when it settled down into communities where we fenced off the land, said this is my land and that's your land, and by the way, I want to invade you to take your resources. This competition led to an arms race, which we are still living through, this accumulation of more and more things. And that actually is not just at the societal level, it's at the individual level. In other words, we as individuals, when we're raised in individualistic societies, believe that the path to happiness, the path to success, is the more that we can accumulate. As I mentioned a bit earlier on, all the research shows that once you've reached the basic level, all that additional effort and energy is actually totally counterproductive. So, but you only discover that when you're at the end of your life, when you suddenly realize I've been wasting all my time pursuing all this stuff, and I'm not as happy as I thought I was going to be. But again, I think this is a message which is getting through to the next generation, and I just hope that they appreciate that there is more to life than the accumulation of stuff, because the last thing you want to be doing on your deathbed is lying there and thinking, I wish I bought another piece of crap, because you don't need it. All right. You're not taking it with you. So kind of that's what we got to kind of wake up and smell the roses about.
Well, one thing we talked about is this is going to take a global, universal effort for everybody working together to solve this problem. But yet here in the United States and elsewhere, we're so fractured. Yeah. We're so divided that there's no sense of the common good anymore. How do we get back to that?
That's a tough one. I mean, there's many problems in the US, and I'm not an expert, and I don't have a simple solution. Believe me, if there was one, I'm sure it would have been implemented. There are so many things going wrong with the political systems and the social systems. But, you know, civilizations come and go. And so, you know, it will eventually change for a better situation at some point. But I haven't got an off-the-cuff answer for you, John. That's a tough one.
Nobody does, but we wouldn't be here if we didn't think there was hope for the future, would we?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and hopefully tuning in tonight is the next leaders, people who aspire to make the difference, and that's the one thing. You know, certainly that's one thing about your country, which is much different, is that everyone has an opportunity. The barriers to progression are a lot less in many ways. So there's opportunity in the US to make a difference. And it's a little bit more problematic in more kind of older European countries. They tend to be a little bit more class oriented. But yeah, again, that is changing.
Okay. So I was going to ask you, where do you get your hope from?
Where do I get my hope from? Well, I am an optimist, and optimism is kind of partly genetic. I think I've always been like that, and likewise, pessimism is partly genetic as well. Some people are just, you know, glasses half empty, and some people are glasses half full. For me, I like it was Churchill said, a pessimist sees difficulty where there's opportunities, and an optimist sees opportunities where there are difficulties. So I kind of like disruption. I like a little bit of chaos because I like to see what can be done. And so where I get my hope is science. It's seeing the next thing that's developing, the new technologies, the new batteries, the new transport systems, the new way things are changing. I mean, I'm a big nerd on the technological development. So I love all that stuff. And I'm kind of not in the middle of that anymore, but I can see the next generation are coming up with a remarkable, I mean, that's the one thing about humans. There doesn't seem to be any limit to their creative power. And so if I wanted to live longer, it's not because I want to live longer. It's just because I want to see what the world's going to be like in 200 years' time. You know, what's going to happen. And to me, that's eternally exciting.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as a teacher, I have so much hope for the future for our young people that, you know, I can't imagine what they're going to come up with. I mean, what's happened in just the last 50 years has been incredible. So what's going to happen in the next 50, no one can tell.
Yeah, and I think we're actually undergoing probably one of the major transitions in human civilization. If you think about it, we had the agricultural, the invention of agriculture, where we moved from hunter-gatherer and we created civilizations and we started to build the cities and build the laws and all the systems. Then we had the next revolution was the Industrial Revolution, where we had manufacturing and technology take apart. We're now in a digital revolution. And we're of an age, when I did my first bit of programming, I used to do it with a card. I had to punch holes in it. That's how old I am, by the way. Literally putting things into cards. I remember physical discs. Remember those big floppy things? I remember doing all that stuff. I remember coding way back all those decades ago. But look, in the past 10 years, it's astounding how fast it's moving. And this, as I said, is a transition in our civilization. The digital revolution will be transformative. The things which are going to be in the next 10 years or so are going to be so exciting. We're going to have all sorts of stuff in our, going on. So, Bruce, is there any new projects, exciting new projects you'd like to share with us today that you're working on? Yeah, I'm working on another book, although I'm a bit superstitious about saying what it is at the moment, just because I haven't got the publisher nailed down. But I write. I'm coming out of the pandemic lockdown, so my research has been on hiatus for the past 2 years because I can't do any testing with children or anything like that. But I'm starting to think about maybe we can use the new technologies like Zoom as a way of actually interviewing children at a distance, which means that we will be able to reach many more children in geographical locations. I do a lot of remote lecturing now, so I've taught myself how to use the camera and the green screen. And I'm not using it now because it'd just be a bit flashy, but I love it because you can literally broadcast yourself across the world and give a live lecture. And now you've got instantaneous language translation as well. So I could be giving a lecture in Mandarin. It would be amazing. So I'm really excited about how the world of communication is opening up in science communication. So I'm on an up.
Okay. Susan, was there something you wanted to say or ask or conversation? Good morning.
No, I mean, Bruce is doing great. I love his enthusiasm. I do, and it makes me appreciate teachers. Really good teachers are so important, and also you, John. When I was reading about you and saw the pictures of you with the animals with the kids, I mean, it just brought back because my father was also he was a university professor, and he was a geologist and a glaciologist, and he could make just the earth dynamic so exciting, right? And so that's why teachers are so important. Obviously, both of you guys are in that category.
Yeah, it really is kind of how you present it, not what you're saying, but how you present
it. Yeah, exactly.
I used to say entertainment for middle school kids, because you really do have to entertain middle school kids.
Yeah. Well, actually, university students are much the same. You gotta tap their emotional system, because that's how you learn.
That's right.
You know, you can learn by rote, but you'll never remember. But you know, if you inspire through engagement, as you said, and just appealing to the curiosity, because we are a curious animal, we are a curious species. We want to ask questions, and if you can tap into that, then it makes learning so much easier and teaching even easier. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm seeing Susan in a couple of weeks, so it's going to be great to catch up, and you know, we can inspire each other on the various things that we do.
Nice. Okay, well, first, Bruce, I want to thank you and Susan both for being here and sharing your expertise with us tonight. It's been a real pleasure. And I want to thank the 12th Hour and Vanquish Media for putting this all together for us. And I want to leave you with a quote from my good friend, Dr. Jane Goodall, who, by the way, is not too far from you over in Bournemouth. Quote, "For those who have experienced the joy of being alone in nature, there is really little need for me to say much more. For those who have not, no words of mine can ever describe the powerful, almost mystical knowledge of beauty and eternity that comes suddenly and all unexpected." End quote.
Great.
So I hope all of you learned a little bit about climate crisis today, and to learn more, come back tomorrow. We're going to do another interview tomorrow. And I forgot who they jumped on. I forgot who I'm interviewing tomorrow. But we will be back tomorrow, I believe, at 3 o'clock.
Somebody really interesting.
His name's back here behind me. I just found out just earlier today. But anyway, we will be back tomorrow, Thursday and Friday, to talk more about the 12th hour and climate change. Thank you for being here today, and have a good evening.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.